So, Ted, that beard of yours is coming in quite nicely.
Why, thank you, sir. I'm just, trying to get in touch with my inner dwarf.
Kind of dwarf you're trying to be.
What do you mean? Dwarves are dwarves, right?
Well, Ted, maybe we should discuss 3 new ways to dwarf in 5th edition D&D. Welcome to Nerdarchy. For nerds, by nerds, I'm Nerdarchist Dave, and as usual, I'm joined by this nerd.
Nerdarchist Ted.
You'll be like a dwarf using your stone cutting knowledge when it comes to D&D if you hit that subscribe button.
If you want more Nerdarchy videos in your YouTube feed, then you're going to have to ring that notification bell like hammer to an anvil.
You know, Ted, you know something dwarves really like?
Stone?
And metal, both of which you can get over on Easy Roller Dice, the sponsor of this video, for your dice. Whether it's your first set of dice or your 1 millionth set of dice, Easy Roller Dice for all your dice rolling needs. Not only that, there's a one-time special promo code down in the description. It's going to give you a whopping 20% off.
All right, so today we're going to talk about 3 new ways to dwarf. What does that mean, Dave?
Well, one of the things that's kind of irksome about D&D, species, race, cultures, I mean, whatever you want to call it, right? Is like, if you're a dwarf, you're just a dwarf. You know, you have a couple sub races, but it doesn't matter where you're from. Like, the dwarves are all pretty much the same. They have the same cultures, and it just doesn't make any sense. We have several sub races.
Yeah, there's the gray dwarf, there's the mountain dwarf, and the hill dwarf.
Yeah, and we're kind of excluding the Eberron ones because that's a little bit different, but it actually kind of folds into what we're talking about. But we're going to go in a different direction. We're going to come up with some ideas to throw out there for, for your campaigns, and maybe you want to discuss below, how you use dwarves in your game, how you make them different, or it doesn't not matter. If you're a mountain dwarf, you're a mountain dwarf. It doesn't matter, where in the multiverse you came from. You guys grew up the same either way, which is weird, but it's your game. Play it the way you want. So new way to dwarf number 1, the Grey Guard. This is the idea that the Duergar have this really tragic backstory, which has corrupted them and kind of made them evil and bitter. But what if they went the other way? What if, Duergar, because they were captured by illithids and mind flayers and experimented on, and eventually they break free? Well, what if instead of becoming these cruel overlords of the Underdark, they instead become, these bastions of light and, seekers of purity, and to help those in need. They find mind flayers. They break out the people they've captured them. They try and rehabilitate them. They try to help them. They're the good guys of the Underdark.
So, I mean, they could absolutely, be like scholars and warriors, out for justice, out to make the world a better place, spreading knowledge of what the process is like, not so much in the, I'm trying to scare you, but that enlightenment, that, look, this is what is capable, this is what our race has endured. And if you aren't, forewarned and prepared, you might fall victim to the same fate.
Yeah, and they could even still be their, dour, taciturn selves, but, that could be like hiding their hearts of gold. And, they live by the 3 R's: rescue, rehabilitate, and return home those who've been taken by the mind flayers and illithids. And never again will other races have to suffer.
Yeah, I mean, that would be a great thing, especially like if it's a small, group or sect, it could totally be, no one has heard of these things, no one knows of this order, this group. They just know that Grey Dwarves, the Duergar, are, evil and heartless and slavers and whatever else that is in your world. And, up ahead, you see some gray-skinned dwarves, and you're fully expecting a fight, and, being good guys, you're not going to throw the first punch, and, they totally just roll up, maybe not so much unarmed, but, like, their arms are not at the ready, and they engage in conversation, and, they begin, telling of this. Like, it would be a great way to throw your players for a loop of, like, wow, I was not expecting this, or, perhaps, you were out, you want to play this as a player character, representing this small sect, and most of your group has been, killed, taken captive, or what have you, and you use that as your backstory for how, you get linked up with the rest of, the adventuring party, and perhaps at some point in time when you're powerful enough that you want to, bring a rescue mission and continue your mission with the help of your newfound allies.
Yeah, it's a totally, you can't judge a book by its cover type deal. So, new way to dwarf number 2, the Clan of Conquerors. So, dwarves tend to be suspicious and isolationist by nature. Oftentimes, they're described that way in the lore and fantasy. But what if they weren't? What if they were expansionists instead and actually colonizers and conquerors? I almost envision them being raised almost like Spartans at a young age. They're taking away from their parents and put into these like communal structures where they're raised. Dwarves will apprentice for like 50 years in a trade, right? Well, imagine if they took that dedication and instead of, worrying about crafting and being smiths and masons and brewers, instead they turned it to nothing but the arts of war from that, and their apprenticeship was nothing but soldiering and becoming these ultimate warriors to go out into the world, conquer other civilizations and cultures, and then, kind of implement their own rulership. Then they would probably like try and pull those cultures into their own, obliterate any culture that was there before and usurp it with their own, and, and so on and so forth, almost until the point where these are actually kind of like the bad guys. These could be mountain dwarves. It's not really that far of a stretch for the gray dwarves as they're written in the lore wise, right. But for the others, it would be definitely a little bit of a different take, I think.
There's definitely a lot of, imagery where you see the Games Workshop dwarves, with like the crazy Viking beards and what have you. You could totally take this style and go Viking-esque, but as opposed to returning home, it's like, no, we're going to send out a force, and that's going to, take over and mainstay. And, once that's been solidified, the Dwarven border, gets increased, and you get to spread and spread and spread. It could be a regional thing, this iron-mongering, horde of dwarves that just take land and then keep it. And, like, it's got a little bit of Grey Dwarf, it's got a little bit of Orc in it. You could definitely take from some of the other concepts that have existed in, D&D lore before, but you attribute it to the surface-dwelling dwarves. And it's like, man, what happened here? Is there a Dwarven god that has, roused up the ire? Is it a particular Dwarven warlord who has come to power and said, no, for too long we have been, ravaged by the lands of men, and, it is our time to shine, it is our time to, set forth a kingdom, that will, quake throughout the history. I think that could be a lot of fun to make your campaign world, shine differently from other worlds.
Forget the fantasy world and fantasy lore. You just look to the real world. You can look to empire builders in our own history, and you could just model that, but with the dwarves, maybe some of the dwarven flavors, and see how they treated the conquered people and how they did it. Like, you could build a whole game around the fact that this area, this region is ruled by dwarves. Even you might be an elf, you might be halfling or human, but the people that are in charge are the dwarves. You could even like looking to the Roman Empire and things like that would be a great place. So next up we have new ways to dwarf number 3, the Naturalist.
All right, so this one was my idea, and I took some inspiration from a particular dwarf in R.A. Salvatore novels. He transitions from Catterley Tales into the Drizzt books, but that is Pickle Boulder Shoulder, the Dwarven Druid. So what if, somehow, his idealism of, existing in nature totally went away from that which dwarves typically do, and this group of dwarves integrated and commingled with elven culture so that you could have this immaculate city of elven and dwarven, make, where there are tunnels below the ground, totally sweeping and not doing anything to damage the trees, but then this beautifully interwoven, network in the massive branches so that you've got settlements above and below, and elves and dwarves live in both. And it's this totally, live off the land, totally hidden areas so that if you don't live there, you could walk through it and never know unless you see somebody walking around, that you are in the middle of this settlement or this town.
Yeah, it would be a cool thing to see like the commingling of earth magic and biomancy to make these living structures of stone and wood, and like coming up with the lore that what drove these particular elves and dwarves to cohabitate together, the realm outside of their forest domain so horrible they had to band together. Were the dwarves driven from their homes, centuries or decades, centuries, millennia ago, and the elves offered them succor, and from that they built this relationship and this co-civilization, this co-culture where they've come together, and it's fundamentally changed how dwarves kind of are in your setting, in your world, or at least these dwarves anyway. They have a newfound respect for nature and things that grow from the ground. But, maybe they've also maintained some of those aspects of dwarf culture and mingled in the elven. So it'd be kind of cool to see how they blend together. And also, relationships that have come about, is there intermarrying between dwarf and elf because they live together so long? Is there a caste system that, the different races fill? Or is it more integrated than that? So you could definitely come up with some different and new ideas. But the question is, what kind of ideas are you guys coming up with? Are all your dwarves the same? Would you use any of these in your game? What kind of concepts do you like? If you like these twists on familiar races, we have more. You can check out New Ways to Kobold in D&D up here.
If you want more 5e content with a twist, over on Patreon, we're creating 5e content every month for players and DMs alike.
That isn't all, folks. We do monthly giveaways our patrons are automatically entered in. We also have fan games every month and more.
So until next time,
stay nerdy.
Stay nerdy.